I've been a labor nurse for 12 years. The newborn I just delivered has my birthmark. The baby girl came at 3:17 a.m. on a Saturday, which was typical for County General's labor and delivery ward during my night shift rotation. The mother was a young woman named Jessica Yates who'd checked in at midnight with her husband David, both nervous first-time parents who'd held hands through every contraction. I'd coached Jessica through 2 hours of active labor and caught the baby when she finally crowned, performing the routine cleaning and assessment while the new parents cried with relief. What wasn't routine was when I lifted the baby's left arm to check her reflexes and saw the distinctive port wine stain birthmark covering the inside of her forearm from wrist to elbow. The mark was shaped exactly like mine, an irregular pattern that resembled a maple leaf with 3 distinct lobes and a stem, positioned at the exact same angle and location where my birthmark had been since birth. I'd lived with that mark for 34 years and knew every contour intimately, knew how people always asked if it was a burn scar, knew the precise measurements because dermatologists had documented it multiple times throughout my life. This newborn had an identical mark within millimeters of my own placement and shape. I stood there holding this minutes-old infant and felt my hands start trembling. Port wine stains are vascular birthmarks caused by malformed capillaries under the skin, and while they're common enough that about 3 in 1,000 babies have them, the specific size, shape, location, and pattern are as unique as fingerprints. The odds of 2 people having identical marks were astronomical. The odds of me being the nurse who delivered a baby with my exact birthmark were impossible. I forced myself to focus on finishing the newborn assessment, checking heart rate and respiration, weighing and measuring, administering eye drops and vitamin K injection. My training took over and I completed every task with mechanical precision while my mind raced through explanations that made no sense. Jessica was asking if her baby was healthy, and I assured her everything was perfect, that she had a beautiful daughter weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces with excellent APGAR scores. I wrapped the baby and handed her to Jessica, watching the new mother's face light up with joy while I struggled to understand what I'd just seen. After I'd finished the delivery paperwork and gotten Jessica settled in recovery, I went to the staff bathroom and pulled up my sleeve to compare my birthmark against the photos I'd just taken of the baby's arm during documentation. Identical. The same irregular maple leaf shape with 3 distinct lobes, the same stem extending toward the wrist, the same reddish-purple coloring, the same size covering approximately 40 square centimeters. I'd photographed newborn birthmarks thousands of times in my 12 years as a labor nurse, documented every variation and type, and I knew with professional certainty that this wasn't a coincidence or normal occurrence. I needed to check the mother's medical history and find out if there was any connection I'd missed. I logged into the system and pulled up Jessica Yates's records, searching for any overlap with my own history. She was 26 years old, no previous pregnancies, no medical complications, prenatal care at Valley Women's Health Center starting 8 months ago. I'd never met her before tonight and had no connection to her family or medical providers. My supervisor, Linda Ashford, found me in the records room at 5 a.m., still searching through files, and asked if I was okay because I'd been in there for over an hour. I showed her the photos of my birthmark next to the newborn's birthmark and watched her face go from confused to shocked. Linda had been a nurse for 28 years and had seen thousands of deliveries, and she immediately understood that what I was showing her was medically impossible. She asked if I'd spoken to the parents, and I said no, that I didn't know what to say without sounding insane. Linda suggested I take the rest of the shift off and go home to process what had happened, that she'd cover my remaining patients and we'd figure out what to do when we had clearer heads. I refused and said I needed to understand how this baby could have my birthmark, that something was wrong and I couldn't just ignore it. Linda looked at the photos again and said we should document everything and maybe call the hospital's ethics board, but she didn't know what the official protocol was for a nurse discovering a newborn with her identical birthmark. I went back to check on Jessica at 6 a.m. during my final rounds and found her nursing the baby while David slept in the chair beside the bed. Jessica smiled and thanked me for being such a calming presence during the delivery, said I'd made her feel safe during the scariest experience of her life. I asked her about her prenatal care and she said Valley Women's Health had been wonderful, that Dr. Laura Fleming had been her obstetrician throughout the pregnancy. I asked if she'd had any fertility treatments or complications getting pregnant and Jessica said no, they'd conceived naturally on the second try. I noticed she had brochures on her bedside table from Valley Women's Health about postpartum care and infant development. I asked if she'd recommend the practice, and Jessica said absolutely, that Dr. Fleming and the fertility specialists there were amazing. That caught my attention because Jessica had just said she'd conceived naturally, so why would she mention fertility specialists? Jessica noticed my confusion and explained that Valley Women's Health had a fertility clinic attached to the main practice, that she'd initially gone there for a consultation before trying naturally first. After my shift ended at 7 a.m., I drove to my apartment but couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the photos on my phone, comparing my birthmark to the newborn's mark, trying to find any difference that would make this explainable. There was nothing. They were identical in every measurable way. I called my mother and asked her detailed questions about my birth, whether she'd had any fertility treatments or unusual medical procedures during her pregnancy. My mother said no, I'd been a normal, healthy pregnancy without complications, born at County General 34 years ago after 12 hours of labor. She asked why I was asking these questions, and I told her about delivering a baby with my exact birthmark. My mother was quiet for a long moment before saying that was impossible. that birthmarks weren't hereditary and couldn't be replicated. She suggested I was probably seeing similarities that weren't really there because I was tired from working night shifts. I told her I'd been a labor nurse for 12 years and knew the difference between similar and identical. My mother sounded worried and said maybe I should talk to someone professional about this obsession. I researched Valley Women's Health Center and found they'd been operating for 15 years with a stellar reputation for obstetric care and fertility treatments. Dr. Laura Fleming was board certified with extensive experience in high-risk pregnancies and reproductive medicine. The fertility clinic component specialized in IVF, egg donation, and genetic screening. Their success rates were impressive, well above national averages for helping couples achieve pregnancy. Nothing about them seemed suspicious or unusual. I made an appointment for a consultation claiming I was interested in fertility preservation options, and they scheduled me for the following Wednesday. The receptionist asked if I had any specific concerns or medical history relevant to fertility, and I said I was a healthy woman in my 30s who wanted to explore options for future family planning. She said Dr. Fleming would be able to discuss all available treatments during our consultation. I hung up feeling like I was starting an investigation, but not knowing what I was investigating or what I expected to find. My best friend Natalie came over that evening and I showed her the photos of the birthmarks. She was a physician assistant who'd worked in pediatrics for 8 years and immediately recognized the impossibility of what she was seeing. She asked if I'd considered that maybe this baby was somehow biologically mine, that maybe my eggs had been stolen and used without my consent. The suggestion sounded absurd but also made a terrible kind of sense. How else could a baby have my exact birthmark unless we shared genetic material? Natalie said if my theory was right, someone had accessed my biological material and used it for reproduction without permission, which would be multiple felonies including theft, fraud, and reproductive rights violations. She suggested I get legal advice before confronting anyone or making accusations. I said I didn't have proof, just an impossible coincidence that might mean nothing. Natalie pulled out her phone and started researching cases of reproductive fraud, finding dozens of examples where fertility clinics had used wrong eggs or embryos, where doctors had used their own sperm without consent, where biological materials had been stolen or misused. The pattern was disturbing and more common than I'd realized. I couldn't wait until Wednesday, so I went to Valley Women's Health Center on Monday morning claiming I'd lost my insurance card and needed to verify my records. The receptionist asked my name and I gave it, watching her search the system. She said they had no records for me and asked if I'd been a patient under a different name. I said I must have been thinking of a different practice and apologized for the confusion. As I was leaving, I noticed a wall of photos showing babies born through their fertility clinic's assistants, hundreds of smiling infants with their grateful parents. I stopped and examined the photos carefully, looking for any other children with distinctive birthmarks or unusual features. Most looked like typical newborn photos, but 3 babies had visible birthmarks on their exposed skin. I took photos of these pictures with my phone and left before anyone questioned what I was doing. In my car, I zoomed in on the images and felt my stomach drop. One baby had a distinctive strawberry hemangioma on their cheek that looked identical to one I'd photographed on another newborn 3 years ago during a delivery at County General. The mother in that delivery had also used Valley Women's Health for prenatal care. I called the hospital records department and requested the file for the delivery I'd done 3 years ago, claiming I needed it for quality assurance review. The administrator said she'd email me a digital copy within an hour. When the file arrived, I confirmed what I'd remembered. The mother had been 31 years old, used Valley Women's Health for fertility treatments before conceiving, and the baby had been born with a distinctive strawberry hemangioma on the left cheek. I compared it to the photo on Valley Women's Health's wall, and they were identical, not just similar, identical in size, shape, location, and coloring. I pulled more files from deliveries I'd done over the past 12 years where mothers had used Valley Women's Health, looking for other babies with distinctive birthmarks. I found 6 more cases where the babies had unique marks that appeared elsewhere in my records on children born to different parents. The odds of multiple babies having identical distinctive birthmarks across unrelated families were astronomical. Something systematic was happening at Valley Women's Health Center, and it involved biological materials being reused or duplicated without parents' knowledge or consent. I drove to the police station and asked to speak to someone about medical fraud. The officer at the desk looked skeptical, but called for Detective Marcus Holmes. Wait, I can't use Marcus. Detective Raymond Holmes, who worked financial crimes and fraud investigations. Raymond listened to my explanation with increasing interest, making notes about Valley Women's Health, the identical birthmarks, my theory about stolen or misused biological materials. When I finished, he said what I was describing could constitute reproductive fraud on a massive scale if proven, but he needed concrete evidence beyond birthmark similarities. He asked if I had access to genetic testing or medical records proving biological relationships between these children and specific individuals. I said no, just photographs and medical documentation of the births. Raymond said he'd need probable cause to get a warrant for Valley Women's Health's records, and right now I had suspicious coincidences, but not proof of criminal activity. He suggested I gather more evidence, document patterns, and try to identify victims who might have standing to file formal complaints. He gave me his card and said to contact him when I had something more substantial. My consultation at Valley Women's Health happened Wednesday morning in a cheerful office decorated with baby photos and inspirational quotes about motherhood. Dr. Laura Fleming was in her 50s with a warm smile and professional manner that immediately put patients at ease. She asked about my reproductive history, and I told her I'd never been pregnant but was interested in egg preservation for future options. Dr. Fleming explained the process of egg retrieval and freezing, the success rates for using frozen eggs later, and the costs involved. She asked if I'd ever donated eggs before, and I said no. She mentioned that many women offset the costs of egg preservation by participating in their donor program, which paid between $8,000 and $12,000 per donation cycle. I asked how the donor program worked, and Dr. Fleming explained they matched donors with recipient couples based on physical characteristics, medical history, and other factors. She said if I was interested, I'd need to undergo medical screening and psychological evaluation. I said I'd think about it and scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next month. After leaving Dr. Fleming's office, I searched the center's layout and found the fertility clinic's laboratory on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator up, claiming I was lost and looking for the pharmacy, and walked past the lab's entrance. Through the glass walls, I could see technicians working with microscopes and storage equipment, rows of liquid nitrogen tanks labeled with dates and ID numbers. A sign on the wall listed strict security protocols and authorized personnel only. I took photos of the layout and left before anyone questioned my presence. In my car, I started documenting everything I'd learned: the consultation with Dr. Fleming, the egg donation program, the laboratory setup, the pattern of identical birthmarks across multiple children born to different parents. I was building a case but didn't know what the case was yet. Were they stealing eggs from women without consent? Reusing donated eggs for multiple recipients? Creating genetic duplicates through some illegal cloning process? None of it made complete sense, but the evidence was undeniable that something was wrong. Natalie helped me create a database tracking every delivery I'd done where the mother used Valley Women's Health and the baby had distinctive birthmarks or unusual features. We found 18 cases over 12 years where unique marks appeared on multiple children across unrelated families. Natalie said this was statistical proof of systematic irregularity, that natural occurrence couldn't explain this pattern. She suggested we needed geneticist input to understand what biological process could create these duplications. She called a colleague who specialized in reproductive medicine and explained the situation without identifying Valley Women's Health by name. The colleague said the only way multiple children could have identical distinctive birthmarks would be if they shared significant genetic material, either through being related as siblings or through artificial genetic manipulation, which was illegal for human reproduction. He said if a fertility clinic was creating genetic duplicates or using the same genetic material for multiple births without consent, that would be catastrophic fraud with criminal and ethical implications beyond anything he'd encountered in his career. I contacted 4 of the mothers from my database whose babies had been born with identical birthmarks to other children in my records. I explained I was conducting research on birthmark patterns and asked if they'd be willing to participate in anonymous genetic testing of their children. 2 mothers agreed immediately, interested in contributing to medical research. 1 mother refused, saying her child's genetic information was private. The 4th mother became defensive and asked why I was investigating her family, then hung up on me. I arranged for Natalie's geneticist colleague to collect DNA samples from the 2 participating families through a research protocol that protected everyone's privacy. The results came back 10 days later and confirmed what I'd suspected. The 2 children from different families shared 43% of their DNA, making them half-siblings despite their parents having no biological connection. They shared a genetic mother, meaning the same woman's eggs had been used to conceive both children without either recipient family knowing. Natalie's colleague said this was definitive proof of reproductive fraud, and I needed to report it to medical authorities immediately. I took all my documentation to Detective Raymond Holmes and showed him the genetic testing results, the database of identical birthmarks, the pattern of mothers using Valley Women's Health, and my consultation notes with Dr. Fleming. Raymond reviewed everything carefully and said I'd built a compelling case for major fertility fraud. He said he'd request a warrant for Valley Women's Health's records and patient files, and would coordinate with the state medical board to investigate. He warned me this could take months to prosecute, and I should be prepared for Valley Women's Health to have expensive lawyers fighting every step. He also said I should consider the possibility that I was personally involved as a victim if my theory about stolen eggs was correct. I should get genetic testing done on myself and the newborn with the birthmark matching mine to determine if we were biologically related. The thought made me feel sick because if we were related, that meant someone had stolen my eggs years ago and used them without my knowledge or consent, and that newborn was genetically my daughter even though I'd never agreed to donate or participate in reproduction. I went back to County General and requested the newborn's medical records, claiming I needed to complete documentation for quality assurance. The administrator gave me digital access, and I downloaded everything including blood type, genetic screening results, and birth documentation. I compared the baby's blood type to mine O positive, exactly the same. The genetic screening showed markers consistent with Northern European ancestry, which matched my background. I called Natalie's colleague and arranged confidential DNA testing, sending my sample and requesting comparison against the newborn's hospital records. Results came back 6 days later and confirmed what I'd been dreading. The newborn and I shared 50% DNA, making us biological mother and daughter. I had given birth to 0 children in my life but had a genetic daughter who'd been born 3 weeks ago to parents who thought they'd conceived through standard fertility treatments. Someone had stolen my eggs and used them to create this baby without my consent, knowledge, or permission, violating my reproductive rights and the recipient family's right to informed consent about genetic origins. I sat in my apartment staring at the genetic test results and crying with rage and violation. Someone had accessed my body without permission, harvested my genetic material, and created children using my biology as if I was livestock rather than a human being with rights. The newborn I delivered was genetically mine but belonged legally and emotionally to the Yates family who'd raised her from conception without knowing their fertility treatment involved stolen genetic material. I felt connected to this baby in a way that was biological but not maternal, violated by the knowledge that my eggs had been used but grateful the baby existed and appeared healthy and loved. The complexity of emotions was overwhelming. I called Natalie and told her about the results and she came over immediately, holding me while I processed what had been done to me. She said we needed to find out when and how my eggs had been stolen, whether Valley Women's Health had accessed them during some medical procedure, or if the theft had happened elsewhere and they'd purchased stolen materials. I reviewed my complete medical history going back 15 years, looking for any procedures where eggs could have been accessed. 7 years ago, I'd had emergency surgery for a ruptured ovarian cyst at County General. The surgeon had been Dr. Paul Novak, who'd performed laparoscopic surgery to remove the cyst, and had mentioned during post-operative checkup that my ovaries were healthy with good egg reserves. I'd thought nothing of it at the time, just standard medical information. But now, I wondered if that surgery had been used to harvest eggs without my consent. I requested my surgical records from County General and found that Dr. Novak had left the hospital 5 years ago to join private practice. When I searched for his current employment, I found he was medical director of Valley Women's Health Center's fertility clinic. The connection was clear and damning. Dr. Novak had operated on me 7 years ago, had access to my ovaries during surgery, and now worked for the fertility clinic where my stolen eggs had apparently been used to create multiple children. Detective Raymond Holmes raided Valley Women's Health Center on a Friday morning with warrants for records, equipment, and personnel interviews. I wasn't present, but Raymond called me that afternoon and said they'd seized extensive documentation showing systematic reproductive fraud going back at least 10 years. Dr. Fleming and Dr. Novak had been running an illegal egg harvesting operation where they collected eggs from women during routine medical procedures without consent, then used those eggs in fertility treatments for wealthy clients who paid premium prices for guaranteed genetic quality. They'd stolen eggs from hundreds of women, including me, created thousands of embryos, and conducted pregnancies that produced at least 400 children across different families who had no idea their children were genetic half-siblings conceived using stolen biological materials. The financial scope was staggering, with the clinic charging $200,000 per successful pregnancy to desperate couples willing to pay anything for a baby. Raymond said both doctors had been arrested along with 6 staff members involved in the scheme. The clinic's records showed detailed documentation of which stolen eggs were used for which pregnancies, including notes about my eggs being particularly viable and used for 17 different successful pregnancies over the past 6 years. I had 17 genetic children ranging from age 6 months to 6 years old, living with families across 3 states who believed they'd conceived through legitimate fertility treatments. The families were being notified about the fraud and offered genetic counseling and legal support. I asked Raymond what happened now, and he said the criminal prosecution would take months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Fleming and Dr. Novak would likely spend decades in prison. The civil lawsuits from victims would bankrupt everyone involved, and I'd need to decide how much contact I wanted with the families raising my genetic children. The media coverage was extensive once the arrests became public. Headlines about massive fertility fraud, stolen eggs used for hundreds of pregnancies, doctors facing life sentences for reproductive crimes. My name was kept confidential in news reports, but everyone at County General knew I was the nurse who'd broken the case open. Colleagues congratulated me and called me brave while I struggled with feeling violated and angry and grief-stricken about children who existed because my body had been exploited without consent. The hospital offered counseling and legal support. My mother called crying and apologizing for not believing me when I'd first told her about the birthmark. My father said he'd support whatever decisions I made about connecting with the genetic children. Natalie stayed with me through the worst days when everything felt overwhelming and impossible. Jessica and David Yates contacted me through their attorney 6 weeks after the raid. They'd learned their daughter was my genetic child conceived using stolen eggs, and they were devastated and furious and terrified about what this meant for their family. Their attorney said they wanted to acknowledge my biological connection, while maintaining that they were the baby's legal and emotional parents, that they'd done nothing wrong and shouldn't be punished for doctors' crimes. I met them at a mediation session facilitated by hospital attorneys and victim advocates. Jessica was crying and holding her daughter, asking me if I planned to fight for custody or disrupt their family. I told her I had no intention of taking her daughter away, that she and David were the baby's real parents, and I was just the genetic source material stolen without my permission. I said I didn't want to cause them more pain, but I did want to be acknowledged as having been violated and exploited. David asked if I wanted contact with their daughter, and I said I didn't know yet, that everything was too raw and complicated and I needed time to process my feelings about being a genetic mother to 17 children I'd never chosen to create. The trial happened 9 months later, and I testified about delivering the baby with my birthmark, about investigating Valley Women's Health, about discovering my eggs had been stolen during surgery and used for multiple pregnancies. Dr. Novak's defense attorney tried to claim the egg harvesting had been authorized through consent forms I'd signed before surgery, but my attorney produced evidence showing those forms were forged with my signature copied from medical records. Dr. Fleming's defense claimed she'd believed the eggs were from legitimate anonymous donors and didn't know about the theft, but prosecutors showed emails where she'd explicitly discussed harvesting eggs from unsuspecting patients during routine procedures. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges including theft, reproductive fraud, medical malpractice, and conspiracy. Dr. Novak received 40 years in prison. Dr. Fleming received 35 years. The 6 staff members received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. Valley Women's Health Center was permanently closed and its assets seized to create a victim compensation fund. I received $2.7 million in compensation from the seized assets and civil settlements, but the money felt meaningless compared to what had been taken from me. My reproductive autonomy, my right to decide if and when I became a genetic parent, my body's privacy and integrity, all violated by doctors who'd seen me as raw material for their profitable scheme. I quit my job at County General because I couldn't work labor and delivery anymore without thinking about exploitation and theft. I went back to school and got certified as a patient advocate specializing in reproductive rights and medical consent. I started consulting with hospitals to develop better protocols for protecting patients during surgical procedures. I gave presentations at medical conferences about recognizing and preventing reproductive fraud. My experience became a case study used in ethics training for medical students. 3 years after the trial, 8 of the 17 families raising my genetic children reached out about arranged contact. Some wanted to acknowledge the biological connection while maintaining clear boundaries. Others wanted their children to know me as an important person in their origin story, even though I wasn't their mother in any practical sense. I met these children in supervised settings with therapists present, explaining in age-appropriate ways that my eggs had been stolen and used to create them, that their families were their real families, and I was just the biological source who'd been exploited. Most children seem to process this information without trauma, accepting it as an unusual fact about their origins. 2 families requested ongoing contact, and I became something between a distant aunt and family friend to those children, present but not parental, connected but not central. Jessica and David Yates maintained the strictest boundaries, which I respected completely. They sent annual updates about their daughter's development and health, but made clear they didn't want regular contact or relationship. Their daughter would learn the truth when she was older, but until then they wanted to protect her childhood from complications. I understood and agreed, grateful they at least acknowledged my existence rather than pretending the genetic connection didn't matter. 4 years after the delivery that had revealed the fraud, I received a letter from the Yates family with updated photos of their daughter. She was healthy and happy, starting preschool, showing early talent for art. She still had the distinctive maple leaf birthmark on her arm, the mark that matched mine exactly, and had exposed systemic exploitation affecting hundreds of families. That birthmark had been my body's signature on a crime I'd never consented to participate in, evidence that had helped destroy an illegal operation and deliver justice for victims whose biology had been stolen and commodified. Looking at those photos, I felt gratitude that something so violating had led to protection for others, that my unwilling genetic contribution had created a child who was loved and treasured by the family raising her, and that the doctors who'd treated human beings as biological resources were spending decades in prison paying for their crimes. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.